New York City. It is an honor to be joining the Global Peace Foundation again this year. North Korea's possession of nuclear weapons presents an existential threat to the security of South Korea, Japan, the United States, and America's friends and allies around the globe. The world is closer to its first exchange of nuclear weapons than at any time since the Cold War. Such an exchange could cause millions of casualties, incalculable ramifications on the global economy, and large areas of the globe to be uninhabitable for decades to come. Following decades of failed negotiations and other attempts to include the wildly expensive yet unsuccessful Sunshine Policy to prevent North Korea from becoming a fully nuclear-capable state, the world finds itself at a time when clear and decisive action must be taken to ensure the safety and security of the United States and our friends and allies. In an effort to resolve this situation, no instrument of national power should be removed from the United States' arsenal or those of our friends and allies. While kinetic use of the military should be considered as a near last resort, all options should be considered in an effort to remove North Korea's access to all weapons of mass casualties and mass destruction. Specifically, I believe North Korea should not be allowed to retain its nuclear weapons capability. I similarly believe that combat operations on the peninsula should be the last resort to removing that nuclear capability, and that the best solution to tensions on the peninsula and the resolution of nuclear issue should be resolved from within the peninsula itself, with actual assistance from external sources only when necessary. There are potential scaled options to prevent North Korea's continued possession of nuclear weapons and hopefully avoid combat operations on the peninsula or elsewhere. But first, there are several assumptions that must be considered. First, Kim Jong-un will not eliminate his nuclear program without significant external coercion or pressure from within. Second, Kim Jong-un will use all means at his disposal to remain in power. These means include the use of weapons of mass destruction, to include chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and high-yield explosive weapons. Third, cyber attacks from North Korea on infrastructure, to include banking, business, and medical services, are likely as retaliation. Fourth, special forces and other clandestine incursions into South Korea, Japan, Guam, and the continental United States are likely as retaliation. Fifth, electromagnetic pulse attacks will likely be seen. And threats to starve his own people and blame their suffering on the United States and allies is not out of the question. I believe the military and political elites in North Korea are extraordinarily angry at and fearful of Kim Jong-un for his execution of members of the North Korean royal family and other senior leaders, and that the North Korean elites are capable of running North Korea if Kim Jong-un were to lose power. Additionally, it is likely that other regional players have approached members of those North Korean elites to ensure that a post-Kim regime would be aligned with the interests of other regional players. And while North Korean elites may not be immediately prepared for transition to a democratic system, they strongly desire to look more like South Korea than they do North Korea's other neighbors. In my view, if North Korea's nuclear program is not eliminated, South Korea and Japan will likely become nuclear nations in the near term. The Chinese will respond with increased nuclear weapons and defensive capabilities. Iran would also likely follow the North Koreans' nuclear efforts if North Korea, quote, got away with it, unquote. And you would see that being followed by Iran's Sunni rivals in the Middle East and beyond. This nuclear proliferation will greatly increase the risk of losing control of fissile material worldwide and possibly result in a radiological event in the United States or elsewhere around the globe. The United Nations security resolutions against North Korea do not impact the regime fast enough, nor are other countries of the United Nations fully implementing the sanctions in such a manner that the Kim regime is fully impacted. The United States and its allies should seek to remove all nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction from the DPRK and should pursue the longer-term goal of a unified peninsula that is aligned politically and economically with a democratic system. There are opportunities here. While the current crisis presents enormous risks, it also presents opportunities to eliminate once and for all weapons of mass destruction from the Korean Peninsula. An opportunity to allow China to play a constructive role as an emerging great power. To welcome the people of North Korea to the world of responsible nations. In the longer term, it may allow reunification of the Korean people under a government that is supportive of freedoms found only in democracies. In addition to serving democratic interests and those of allies around the world and the elimination of these weapons of mass destruction and successful reunification under a democratic government, it would also significantly decrease the suffering of more than 25 million North Koreans. There are many options. There are options to resolve this issue on the peninsula. Those options start with the least impactful to the most impactful, from the least draconian to the most draconian, from the least impact on human life to the most impact on human life. Cutting off the flow of oil to North Korea completely is a start. A comprehensive strategic communication effort with North Korea that basically says, look, you are starving because you are allowing Kim to live lavishly while your life is threatened because the rest of the world will not put up with weapons of mass destruction and specifically nuclear weapons to be controlled by Kim Jong-un. To tighten the worldwide proliferation security initiative that requires countries to inspect and seize contraband materials leaving or entering North Korea. This effort should include ensuring China joins the 195 nations already supporting the initiative. Execute a military blockade with Russia, South Korea, and China of all goods and services. Again, I want to emphasize, this is in order of draconian efforts. We start out very simple, and then we get more complex and more hardcore as we move down the list of items that we can take in order to impact Kim Jong-un and his regime as they control nuclear weapons today. The removal of Kim Jong-un by assisting North Korean elites to assume power with a plan in place of what a democratic-led country would look like is also an option. And then finally, a limited strike of all nuclear and communications capability and simultaneously remove the most senior political and military leaders from that country, followed by a strategic strike on the peninsula. These are terrible options, but another terrible option is keeping weapons of mass destruction in the hands of someone like Kim Jong-un. But there may be another way to look at this. Dr. Moon's Korean dream, a vision for a unified Korea, offers a different roadmap to the above, and one that should be seriously considered as part of the above effort. It is a call for action for Koreans and supporters everywhere to achieve a new nation rooted in a common past. Dr. Moon offers an innovative way forward for the Korean Peninsula that at its heart is Korean-led. He offers that ultimately Korean reunification is the only long-term solution to security, economic, and social problems created throughout the 72-year division of the peninsula. In summary, Dr. Moon's Korean dream is a strategic plan that calls upon the world to reunify the Korean Peninsula with leadership for the reunification starting on the peninsula. Today, right now, we have an opportunity to once and for all eliminate all nuclear weapons from the Korean Peninsula, and serve as an example for the rest of the world while simultaneously reunifying Korea. The issue of a nuclear North Korea goes well beyond the Kim Jong-un regime. As I implied before, if North Korea is allowed to continue its nuclear weapons program, the Japanese and South Koreans will likely be forced to build an advanced nuclear weapons program of their own. For both Japan and South Korea, this nuclear program will provide a type of mutually assured destruction capability, and that paradigm would prevent even the most radical thinking dictators from using their weapons against other nuclear nations. But it doesn't stop there. If Japan becomes nuclear, China will undoubtedly feel a need to expand its weapon systems. In the meanwhile, Iran and other nations will watch as North Korea, quote, gets away with it and develop a nuclear program that threatens world peace, and as many of you know, will likely cause the proliferation throughout the Gulf states and others to building their own weapon systems in the coming decade. And why does all this matter to the average global citizen? Because we will lose control of the massive amounts of fissile material being developed, and somewhere soon a nuclear device will change the world in ways that make 9/11 seem somewhat insignificant. This is an opportunity. Today we have that opportunity to impact not only the Korean Peninsula, but the globe. But in order to do so, a thoughtful approach, a strategic approach, one like Dr. Moon offers, one like the steps offered above provide. If we do these things, we could have a reunified Korea, a Korea without weapons of mass destruction. If we don't, I fear that an expansion of nuclear weapons around the globe is a strong possibility in the very near future. Thank you very much for your time, and I wish you the very best throughout this conference.